Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Little Africa News is on the spot, a political roundup of the latest political news and current events on the local, state, and national level. My name is Mona Davids, and I am the founder and publisher, as well as your host of Little Africa News. Our apologies for the delay. We were experiencing some technical difficulties. Just a quick change to the program. Unfortunately, Mr. Floyd is unable to join us tonight, but we are going to continue with our school safety coverage now at the top of the program. And we're looking forward to hearing from our viewers their concerns and their opinions on what's going on with all of these guns in our schools. We're going to introduce our guests tonight. We have some awesome panelists. And let's start off with Ms. Damaris Monet. Damaris, if you could please introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, Mona. Thank you very much for inviting me this evening. My name is Damaris Monet, as my mother would prefer, it's Damaris Monet. And, let's get this conversation started about, public safety, school safety. We both have children. We've been parents for many, many years. Had to deal with teachers and students and the entire setting. So, let's get started.
Thank you. Our next guest is Michael Oliva. Michael, for our guests who don't know you, please introduce yourself for our viewers.
Sure. Hi, my name is Michael Oliva, president of Sykes Global Communications, a PR and political consulting firm, primarily based in the tri-state area.
Thank you. And last but never least, Dion Powell, if you could please introduce yourself.
I'm Dion Powell of nyconsultant.us. I'm also the founder of the New York State Free Thinking Democrats in the South Bronx and beyond. And I'm also a county committeeman of the 79th Assembly District.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for the introductions. So we're going to get today's show started. Look, many of you who know me know that I'm very passionate when it comes to education, and I'm just as passionate when it comes to school safety. And it's unfortunate that Mr. Floyd couldn't join us this evening, but I want to talk about what the hell is going on in our schools. Last week, we had 5 guns, 4 of them loaded, found at New York City public schools. Many of those schools did not have scanners or metal detectors. Today, again, we have another gun found at another school. And then in addition to that, we have a gunshot fight on the Upper West Side, as well as a stabbing in Queens. So with the gun, it's a 14-year-old. With the stabbing in Queens at IS 8, it's 2 12-year-olds. One 12-year-old stabbed another 12-year-old. And then with the firefight on the Upper West Side, in front of, I think it's West Side Day School, a private school on the Upper West Side. It was also teens, and most likely teens from Martin Luther King High School, which is a school with scanners and metal detectors. So, with all of this going on, a lot of people are asking the question, why are there so many guns in our schools? And then in addition to that, they're also asking the question of why is there a shortage of school safety agents? And to answer that, we go back to 2019 when the city council and our current public advocate, Jumaane Williams, who is now running for governor, but we're going to talk about that later in the show, stopped the incoming class of school safety agents. And what I want our viewers, especially our parents, to know is that there have been no new hires of school safety agents, no new school safety agents since 2019. because of Jamani Williams and the city council, or as I call them, those so-called woke progressives that think they know what's best for us and our communities. And what's going on right now is that we have guns in the schools, we have guns in our communities, the gunfights, the gangs, the gang retaliations, the shootouts has our communities under siege. And right now, it has completely spilled over into the schools. And the people who are front and center, who are on the front lines of protecting our children, are our school safety agents. And as many of you know, the majority of our school safety agents, 70% of them are Black, Hispanic, and Asian women. So these are mothers, these are grandmothers, these are our neighbors. And these are the same women who are out there finding these guns without any bulletproof vests. But they've been under attack by these so-called woke politicians. And again, I am very passionate about it because this is not right. They're endangering the lives of our children. And they're being, attacked, and people are saying they are police in our schools. Let me be clear. Okay, stop the lying. School safety agents are civil servants. They take a civil service exam. They are no different than, say, the school crossing guard. Unlike the rest of the nation outside of New York City, our school safety agents are not police officers. And if you look at the videos that we'll show you today of some of the fights, if you look at your child's school safety agent when you drop your children off at school tomorrow, or if you walk past any school, or if you watch any news coverage of any incidents at a school, take a look at who those people are in that blue uniform that says school safety. And you will see most of them are women, and they're Black, Hispanic, and Asian. So let's get this conversation going with regards to school safety. I'm looking forward to hearing from our viewers, but I want to start first with the video of the press conference with Mayor de Blasio. Actually, the video is an interview from inside City Hall with Errol Lewis, where the mayor, who has been pushing to remove school safety from under the purview of the NYPD, and who has been attacking school safety agents now for almost 2 years, is singing the praises of school safety agents. So let's start with that video first for our viewers.
School safety. The city, you announced today, will be increasing the use of random metal detectors to scan and boost the police presence at public schools following the discovery.
The video seems to be
week. I guess my question is, why random as opposed to systematic? I mean,
my apologies to our viewers. Yes, my apologies to our viewers. This video is not, it seems to be having some type of difficulty with the bandwidth. But just to sum that up, Mayor de Blasio at Monday's press conference, which we know is in response to our press conference that parents and community leaders held on Friday, demanding action from our mayor, did this press conference, and he said that these are the 3 steps that he's taking. Step number 1 is that he's going to increase the amount of random scanning at some schools. And then he will also increase the amount of what are called neighborhood offices, as well as youth offices, to be outside of the schools and, to monitor students outside, not inside the school, as well as to provide safe corridors from train stations or bus stops to the schools. So for our panelists, and I'm going to start off with you, Damaris, looking at all of this coverage with these guns, these knives being found in the schools, what happened today with the shootout on the Upper West Side, which just shows now it's impacting all communities, not just Black and Hispanic communities. But, what do you think about all of these loaded guns being found in schools, with teenage children?
As a parent, I mean, I find it disturbing and concerning because you certainly don't want it to be your child who's going to be accidentally shot. You don't want your child to be the one who was handed a gun. You don't want your child to be anywhere near that, scenario, that type of vicinity. And it's an unfortunate part. But it's also very hard for me at the same time as a product of, I was born in the South Bronx. I was also lived and raised in East LA, and in various different communities where I have seen violence. And so it's kind of, wondering why haven't we really progressed as much when these things still seem to be a systematic problem, but it did, instead of getting better. I think there was a very brief time where it did, but it seems to be now increasing again. And I'm not sure if there's an air of hostility, an air that I no longer have to tolerate somebody else's feelings because it's about my feelings. It's about what I feel and what I'm going through at this moment. And I'm wondering how much of it is just a reaction and, again, stemming anger from the last several years of hate mongering and warring. I mean, we just finally finished a war for 20 years, So we have a lot of hate that's going on between kids who may have lost parents in the war, kids who may have lost parents at the last year and a half with COVID. And so if we're not dealing with mental health and we're not dealing with that issue, their feelings of like, I don't need to tolerate this is not being, I think, met. And I'm concerned about what is going on with that, that discussion in schools. Are we providing the counselors for children to be able to have that discussion, to know that they need to, in order to deal with their anger or their issues, instead of taking it out on the streets and, shooting each other up. I mean, I'm from an era where people used to break dance and we used to have dance crews, and that would be how we dealt with certain scores. But it was really, I think, the energy and emotional level that, dancing and having dance-offs had provided. And so I don't think that there's necessarily that same outlet today, and especially with, COVID and everybody being locked up. I think there's a lot of anger and resentment that may be fostering under this. And I think we're sadly beginning to see the repercussions. And no one was safe from COVID, whether you were Black, white, Latino, Asian, everybody, every race was impacted by this. And I'm just very concerned about the future mental health issues that are stemming from this anger that is now coming out into the streets.
Yes, no, I agree with you. I think that's definitely a part of it. Dion, you grew up here in the Bronx. What do you think about what's going on? I'm not sure. Did you attend a public school or did you attend private school? And which part of the Bronx did you grow up in? I just want to get an idea of, like, do you see, is there a big difference with what's going on in our schools now with these weapons compared to when you attended school?
Well, I was in public school for kindergarten. Then my grandmother yanked me out and threw me in Catholic school for 12 years. Interesting enough, most of the Black men from my cohort in the 80s that are, single, no kids, no drama, no jail, and that kind of stuff, all went to Catholic school. So I just want to point that out to, Archdiocese of New York. Back then there was violence, but, we had a better, moral compass or more wealth as opposed to moral poverty. So this issue today is a combination of a few issues. Now, I put the finger this way and this way, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I'll put it this way to our people. It's our culture, right? And right now, there are not really consequences. And publicly, we're seeing there are no consequences with the prison system, as it were, and that kind of thing. So some people with the, change in bail reform laws, And the defund the police movement actually increased the rebellious nature of our young people because there's no consequences in those kind of authority figures. Now let's point the figure the other way. Number one, how are they gaining access to guns in the first place? You can be a conspiracy theorist and say it's coming from our government, or somehow the criminal masterminds find a way to get it from one area to another here in New York City. Then also the political issue of defund the police. For every action, there's a reaction. So as a consequence, once again, a revolving door, as it were, back onto the streets, and the glorification of being in prison and back on the streets has happened. And what is the gain from this? Well, the sound bites come out, and you have people who have ambition politically using this as a stepping stone to advance their career. But unfortunately, it's backfiring with the hypocrisy, because now people are looking at them and scrutinizing their defunded police as it pertains to them and their own security and their own gated communities. So what can be done? Because I'm solution-based, as you know. One thing I said on social media to somebody about the situation, like, well, you blame all these black leaders and political leaders. Well, we're the parent leaders. That's number one, focusing on our own solutions. Then the next thing is, we're in an election year. You don't have to be brainwashed to vote for anybody who you think you're going to win in November. Vote who you want to vote for, or who you think will actually solve the problem, right? So that takes care of that position. Then next year's 2022, you yourself can run for office or support somebody running for office. Then there's 2023, redistricting. Somebody's going to run for city council. You too, again, can run for city council. So leadership starts with what you can control, and the hardest thing you can control is yourself. And that's it, Mona.
Thank you, Dion. You raised some very interesting points. So let me just say it. The person that has led this campaign to eliminate the jobs of our school safety agents is Jumaane Williams. Okay, Jumaane Williams, Brad Lander, Helen Rosenthal, Corey Johnson, and some other so-called woke members of the city council. All of these people do not live in our communities that are under siege by gun violence. Some of them, their children go to private schools, and the others whose children don't go to private schools live in affluent communities where they don't have these issues. Specifically, speaking about Jumaane Williams, our current public advocate now running for governor of the state of New York, Jumaane Williams lives on Fort Hamilton Army Base. He lives on an Army base surrounded by military police and protected by military police. And any car and anyone that goes into Fort Hamilton is checked, okay? With the wand, going through the military police at the gate. That's what it is. In addition to that, he may say, eliminate our school safety agents. And he also says defund the NYPD, but Jumaane does have a 24-hour NYPD security detail. So that is the height of hypocrisy. While our children are busy dodging bullets coming out of school, and while parents have to worry that our children are going to get shot or stabbed in school. Michael, what's your, what is your thoughts on what's going on with all of these guns being found in schools, the shootings now that just hit the Upper West Side in the 70s, the political football that's been going on with regards to our school safety agents and school safety in general?
Well, it's interesting that there seems to be a sort of, as Dion says, where are these guns coming from? We have a supply chain shortage with so many things, but somehow guns are getting into the city very easily. So it's an interesting thing to contemplate. Where are they coming from? We have more gun control measures in New York than they do in so many other places, but there doesn't seem to be a lack of access here. And if children can do this, just imagine what an adult can do who has much more access to the world around he or she. And to go to Damaris's point, I think that the issue of COVID is a big one. I mean, right now there are protests happening all over the city in every kind of community among all sorts of people, right? It being underreported, it's happening everywhere. There's a sense of chaos. And that sense of chaos, what happens with adults filters down to children. Now the police are saying that they're not really going to do much about this because, you know, the mayor's telling half of them they're not supposed to be able to work. And they're like, well, we're not going to put ourselves at risk if we don't have enough people to actually do anything about this problem. And, you know, the efficacy of lockdowns is in question. What was the cost of these lockdowns? What did it do to our children, to their minds? The efficacy of the vaccine is in question. We're not really sure what's actually working. We have people trying to convince us that they know better, and they don't necessarily know that. So I feel like whatever happens in amongst the adult population, the children hear that every day. They feel it. They know they sense the energy that's happening amongst all of us. And you're starting to see it, you know, play out in ways that are detrimental to, you know, a lot of our children's futures.
No, I agree with you up until a certain point, because right now, yes, the pandemic impacted so many people's lives, so many families who are struggling. Who are experiencing financial difficulties and so many other changes due to this pandemic. But what we're seeing right now in our schools is partially due to a shortage. We have a shortage of 1,800 school safety agents. About 500 of those are school safety agents who refuse to take the vaccine. But I mean, we still have about 1,300 where we have a shortage, because every class of school safety agents usually has at least 500 people or trainees going into the police academy for the 17 weeks of training to become a school safety agent. And that training includes scanning and dealing with metal detectors and understanding how to properly scan bags and also do the wands on individuals. And what I also want to point out is that not only do we have a shortage of school safety agents, but we also have a shortage of metal detectors and other scanning equipment. That's why the mayor, that's why New York City schools only has scanning at 88 schools. And I think they have a little bit over 10 metal detectors to go and do random scanning. And it's random scanning that found their loaded gun at Mott Haven last week because of random scanning. So, you know, this crisis is coming from two sides. The city council and Jumaane Williams, who stopped the incoming classes of school safety agents, and then the fact that we don't have enough equipment to really provide scanning at particularly the schools that really need the scanning. And then coming to Dion's point of where are these guns coming from, guess what? These guns were coming in 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, one. Two, New York does have some strict, gun laws. It's not stopping anything, because I want to know, why the hell does a 14-year-old have a 38 Beretta in school today?
Wait,
Just like I want to.
Look, I agree with you. And look, and when people say, you know, you're keeping the guns out of the hands of the good people, but not necessarily bad people, this is proving their point, right? I mean, it's sort of like, there doesn't seem to be a lack of access to guns if you don't want to like follow the law. So is the law really effective in stopping people from getting guns? And please don't misunderstand me. I completely agree with you. I mean, it should be a priority to have this equipment in school. And going back to the point of like who these safety officers are, you know, maybe you need some tougher people who are like really like, you know, who are able to handle a violent situation better and react. You know, isn't an older person, or what, you know, I mean, we have to get more serious about this. It can't just be like, well, it's the NYPD, but it's not really people who are equipped to deal with violence. We need people who are equipped to deal with these sorts of situations, and it's not generally what you seem to see. Now, maybe in another time that made a lot of sense, but I think in this time it's such a dire situation that they might need to up their game on that.
Right, and I'd like to point out, because I think it really stems into personal responsibility. It's going back to respecting life, right? Honoring and respecting life, because if you don't respect life, you're going to easily dismiss it and disrespect it for somebody else, right? And so having, traveled and been to other countries, there's a difference in expectations as to how that public and how that society behaves. They're all human beings on the same planet, access to the same social media that we have. And yet there is a difference. When I was passing a school, a junior high school and high school, there was a difference in how those kids behaved when they came out of school. They're still teenagers. They still have access to social media and everything else. But you could see that they were a lot more respectful and more mindful to their surroundings and to the amount of noise that they were making and how they were behaving. And horsing around didn't lead to, let's say, fights in the street or and there was a complete difference. I mean, down to, how people honked the horns. I mean, they didn't honk the horns when I was in Europe. There was certain things that, again, I didn't see, even down to how people were with their own dogs, right? How they walk their own dogs. Their dogs were well behaved and they walked there by their side. So it's almost as if everybody practiced mindfulness. And we here in the United States have so individualized everything that we've taught that you don't have to be respectful to the school safety agent. You don't have to be respectful to your teacher, right? You don't have to, you don't have to follow these rules, because rules are made to be broken. I mean, that's been an American theme for as long as I could remember. And so how do we come back to, because prior to having gun laws, we didn't have the same amount of scanning equipment. Let's say, when my dad's generation was growing up, I know that they had shootouts then. I know that they fought. I mean, my dad would tell us, and we're coming back from similar to the age of, the West Side Story in real life. So, there's been that element. But to me, I keep asking, what did we lose somewhere in the past 20 years? And I truly believe that, aside from, conspiracy theory that the government is making it easy access to get guns, we've always known that criminals are going to break the law, that they're criminals in the first place, right? So however they're going to be able to get a gun in New York City, it's going to be accessible, whether it's coming in from another state. We're not checking every single car that's coming in. We're not checking every single, luggage that somebody's coming in from, Montana or something like that. So,
but you check everyone's vaccination cards,
right? You know what I mean? And look, even coming back from Europe, they're protesting over their vaccination requirements and the mask mandates, and
it's all over the world. It's all over the world.
It's all over the world. So we're not the only ones that are pushing back and fighting back. But I think, to a certain level, how much of respect and mindfulness have we lost that we're not sharing with our kids?
I mean, certain people would say that, it's the giving everybody a trophy. I think that's an oversimplification of this sort of hyper focus on the individual. But certainly you're right. I mean, somewhere in the 90s, it seems like, it just became about that child, their feelings, sort of like it wasn't about like, how do I treat, and I don't mean this in a left or right sense, but just the collective and sense of a community. And that's among all kinds of people, economic, color, everything. And it's a different kind of psychology than we used to see,
Well, there's a saying, Larry Sharp said, he ran for governor, the more government you have in your life, the less community and less family you have. So this all began with something so simple as free breakfast and free lunch. That's great the government is providing this, but it takes the ownership and responsibility off the parent to the government. So then you complain that the food the government is feeding your children. So once again, there's more lax and responsibility put on the government and accountability pointed at the government, except for the individuals that are controlling the children. I mean, these things aren't happening at the Catholic schools once again, because education is investment. Now, how do we solve this problem, in my opinion? I think that school safety agents, since they're from the community, should have more training in the community and be more involved inside the classroom, outside the classroom. You may be able to change the uniform, because the uniform is the first thing people see that strike their emotion to the prison to school, the school to prison pipeline, and then they compare the metal detectors and so forth. So if we can start with changing the culture, with getting the community more involved in the schools with the agents and being the agents in the classroom as well as outside the classroom, maybe we could start there with the government control. But if we can't control the parents controlling the children, then it's not going to work. And plus our own toxic culture, which is another conversation.
And
So,
I apologize, Mona, but as
Mhm.
a parent who both my children went to school in the Bronx, I also did at some point in my life. So, but and all the overall in the years. So both my kids and myself went to public schools. Both my children went to high school in the Bronx. My son did public school, which used to be Roosevelt High School, which broken down to 7 different schools and such, right? And my daughter went to Catholic school, also in the Bronx, but to Mount St. Ursula's. And I mean, there was different things, but I know that there were fights after school. They didn't fight in school, right? And this is her Catholic school, but there would be fights down the hill, 2 blocks away, where they kind of were meeting up, whereas in my son's school, it was a public school, there would have been more fights in the lunchroom, right? Or perhaps even break out right there in the classroom. And so I go back into expectations. I mean, we're stemming certain things, but instead of an all-out brawl in the classroom where safety agents and teachers and everybody else are maybe injured, I still have to question, it comes down to expectations. And I apologize for interrupting you, Mona.
no, that's okay. I just want to touch on a couple of things. One, when it comes to the training of school safety agents, a lot of people don't know this, but they are trained for 17 weeks at the academy. So this November 30th class that the commissioner and de Blasio announced on Monday that's coming in, that's going to be starting on November 30th. It's going to take 17 weeks. By the time they're done with their intensive training, school will be almost over. So we're looking at next year. Okay. So we are endangering the lives of our children because we do not have enough school safety agents. But in addition to that, they get all of the training that the police officers go through, except for firearms training. They are trained by the #1 police force, not just in the nation, but in the world. We have police forces from other countries that come here to train with the NYPD. And we have NYPD personnel that go to other countries to train other police forces. This is who is training our school safety agents. So I just want to be clear on that when it comes to their training. But when they were under the Department of Education, or the old Board of Education, as we used to call it, they didn't get that type of training. They didn't get background checks. We had gang members who were school safety officers back then. And there was a whole bunch of inappropriate and crazy, insane stuff going on. That's why they put them under the purview of the NYPD, so that they could do the background checks, so that they could provide the professional development, so that they could provide training on doing a hard lockdown, a soft lockdown, de-escalation, as well as, engaging the students. So they are very, very, people don't understand how well trained they are. They are extremely well trained. But I also want to come back to the part about school safety agents being, in our communities. Let me tell you something. I've been involved in education, advocacy. Let's see, my daughter is 23 now, and my son is 13. So I started with my daughter. And she's been going through it under the NYPD, and I went through the public school system. I'm a graduate of the public school system. I graduated in 1991. So I graduated under the system where it was completely wild with the so-called school safety officers back then. So I see the difference. But what I want to point out is, as a parent and as an involved parent, as a PTA president, as a school leadership team person, as the chairperson of Title I, as the head of the Parents Union, let me tell you something. These school safety agents, who are mothers and grandmothers, they get along better with the kids in the school than the teachers and the guidance counselors and the principals. Teachers, when they're having difficulty with a student, or a student is having a behavioral issue, those teachers, okay? Now, let me put it out there. The majority of kids in our public school system are Black and Hispanic. The majority of teachers in our public school system are white. Okay? All right? These are the facts. When these teachers are having difficulty with that supermajority of kids in the school system, where do they send them? They say, go to the front desk, go sit there by the school safety agents. And when the kids go there, the kids are the school safety agents are like, what's your problem? What's going on? The parents who are going through stuff in their personal life or with their families speak to those school safety agents. And then I don't even want to mention the other activities. I know school safety agents that before New York City provided free lunch to every kid a few years ago. I know school safety agents that were paying for these kids' lunch. I know school safety agents that pay for coats for these kids. I know school safety agents that even give the families money. And then they're very involved in community activities. So they are there. They are part of our community. So I just want to be clear on that one. So
I agree.
that village is there. And that's why it's like, I found it to be so egregious, so offensive when they came for these majority Black and Hispanic women who are mothers and grandmothers in our communities, in our neighbors, who are protecting our children. And now there's a shortage of them. And look, our children in the schools are in crisis. So, the attacks on them, calling them the police, saying they're responsible for the school to prison pipeline. It's not school safety agents. It's the Department of Education, in my opinion, because they failed to educate our children. And we know that. Okay. I want to play a video. I want to see if, the Wi-Fi is going to be better with the bandwidth, because I want to play the video from Commissioner Shea that he did a few days ago, an interview he did talking about the situation, this crisis in our schools with these guns and knives and other weapons. And also, his opinion on the school safety agents who have been under tremendous attack. Malcolm X says the most disrespected person in America is the Black woman. Well, I'll tell you, the most disrespected people right now in New York City, in my opinion, have been the school safety agents. And guess what? Today, everybody is singing their praises because it's these Black and Hispanic and Asian women who are finding guns, who are running towards gunshots like at Midwood High School, and they don't even have bulletproof vests like police officers. So let's see if we can see this video. I know that we're going on about this, but we're going to continue with other topics.
All right, and I want to talk about school safety now, a hot topic during our Pix 11 mayoral forum earlier this week, Commissioner. I want to play just a quick clip of what the candidates had to say about the issue.
My plan is a simple plan. Number one, we must have school safety agents that are trained, paid well, and great at conflict resolution. We should use the new technology. There's technology out there that you don't have to dehumanize children, that could identify a gun without the scanners and without the devices.
You've got to keep the school safety officers under the supervision of the NYPD. They only have 5,000 men and women, mostly of color. They're unarmed. Remember, every time they do an intervention to take a gun or a loaded gun, they're risking their lives.
So there has been an increase in the number of gun incidents at or near schools, Commissioner. You know this, we've talked about it. So do you believe that school safety officers should remain under the control of the NYPD?
I mean, that's a decision, Dan, that's not mine, but I've been on record since last May saying I think they do a great job, and I think we do a great job of supervision of them. I've talked to many parents, many educators that want NYPD to be in control. There are some that have a differing opinion, and I respect that too. What I don't like is that the school safety agents were used as a political ploy last year. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you should show some clips from last year, May and June, when people were calling them out and that they're heavy-handed. And I went very forceful against that. They do an amazing job every day keeping the kids of this city safe. And when I went up to Albany a week ago and mentioned 3 things that need to change, one of them was to raise the age.
Okay, so that's a clip from a couple of days ago with Commissioner Shea. And when he says that these majority Black, Hispanic, and Asian women have been attacked, Helen Rosenthal at a city council hearing earlier this year called them a paramilitary force. Others were saying that they were abusing the students. So they've been under immense attack. The mayor who has been pushing to move them from under the purview of the NYPD to the Department of Education said this on Monday on Inside City Hall. I just want to see if we could play the de Blasio interview, Errol's interview with the mayor.
School safety. The city, you announced today, will be increasing the use of random metal detectors to scan and boost the police presence at public schools following the discovery of 5 guns at various schools over the last week. I guess my question is, why random as opposed to systematic? I mean, do we not know where problems are likely to crop up?
Well, clearly the NYPD and our school safety division in particular, working closely with school leadership, have a really good sense of where there are problems that need to be addressed. But one of the things that we believe is the right way to do things is let the security professionals determine what they think is best, and then they work with the school leadership to determine what makes sense for that school. Some schools have permanent ongoing scanning, other schools have none at all. But there is another option, which is the random scanning. So it comes up regularly.
Okay, so we're just going to discontinue this video for some reason. It's not playing properly.
Hey, Mona.
Yes.
Can I chime in? You touched a few points. Helen Rosenthal, city councilman, was pretty good, but these issues would push her and some other people to say those buzzwords to pander. Now, I want to take it from Commissioner Shea's comment about raise the age. I was a part of that because they are trying the 16-year-olds to trying the 16-year-olds as 18-year-olds, and they changed that. I think that was a good thing. Now back to school safety agents. My cousin was a school safety agent. He too said the same thing you do. They are the go-to people to put out the brush fires, but also give that compassion as a minority black man in the schools, right? And also Chaz Green's part of my district opens up the school on his own time, and I'm there too for the hip-hop stuff in the schools on the weekends and so forth. That's the CUNY piece. Now, in terms of policy, just like CUNY, the school safety agents on top of the train, I believe, should have access to, let's say, to Teach for America, right? Or teacher fellowship. So they can have credits as they go there to become teachers and get the leadership roles in the back office to make some of those decisions. And that's what I meant earlier with that kind of holistic approach, and have the tuition forgiveness. Like in the CUNY, who are CUNY officers on campus, they still have access to classes and getting credits for free and, you know, advancing in their professional development. I think that component can be changed or added if you want to do something with the budget.
No, I mean, speaking of Chaz Green, who is very active in the community, who is a school safety agent, Dion, the loaded gun found at IS 98 over there in Crotona Park in the Bronx last week, right? Yeah. Chaz Green was the one that found that loaded gun.
Nice.
Okay. So, you know, and yes, he does so many activities with the community, with the children. I tried to get him to help me out on some stuff this weekend, and he told me no, he has a whole bunch of Halloween activities with the kids in the community. So he's there, he's on the ground. We have Harold Wise in Staten Island. Like there's just so many of these school safety agents that are there that are doing the work. But
unsung heroes.
But for me as a mother, when I see what they go through, not just finding guns, or with Midwood when they heard the gunshots running outside the school building towards the gunshots with no bulletproof vest. I think that the city should provide them with bulletproof vests, because they are putting themselves at risk every single day, and they're unarmed. And, you know, they get caught up in these melees, in these fights in school. So I just want to try and see if I could get one last video to possibly play. And this is the video of the incident at Susan Wagner High School. And then I want to also show what the students at Susan Wagner High School, which is a non-screening school, are saying now. Let's see if we could play that video.
But despite those words, students want more backup.
Metal detectors for sure.
And what else?
Just like more security to like make sure that students aren't fighting and that it won't happen again.
You're on mute, Mona.
Yeah, I want to just show a little bit of the video of the fight at Susan Wagner. If we could just rewind a little bit to see some of the video so that our audience can see what these majority Black and Hispanic women go through trying to protect our kids.
The video is troublesome as chaos erupted in the halls of Susan Wagner High School. Blood smeared on the floor and items scattered as a fight broke out Friday afternoon. Police say the melee started outside of the building between two students and then spilled indoors. A 13-year-old girl punched another student several times in the head as school resource officers and teachers, along with other students, tried to break it up.
We had to sit and stay still because there was a hard lockdown inside. I knew one of the teachers, so like I just kind of got really scared.
Even more frightening, detectives say that 13-year-old had a knife, and the rumors and fears circulated quickly in the school.
Everyone on their
Okay,
phone, like the videos, and
we can stop there. But my point is, and this is what I want to get across to our viewers, and that's why I'm using this platform, because today at on the Upper West Side, there was a shooting on the street outside of a private school, a very expensive private school. But as we hear, those it seems to have been Martin Luther King high school students, and Martin Luther King has scanners. But the fact of the matter is, if you are living in Manhattan or in some cozy neighborhood or affluent neighborhood, do not think that this gun violence is not going to come to your doorstep. Because today, what we've been experiencing in our communities came to the Upper West Side. No one is immune to this. So on that note, I just want to thank our panel for having this discussion,
Can I
looking
just
at
add one thing?
what's
Can I add
going
one
on.
thing?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So I lived on the Upper West Side for a very long time, and
I know, that's why I kept on saying that.
I've known. I had worked my way up there. I've known Helen for a long time, but I have to say, like, that remark about a paramilitary organization is just, it's almost like I call it progressive to the point of parody. For people who are unarmed, do not have any sort of protection, and are like really, putting themselves at risk. If you want to see a paramilitary organization, somebody could show you that. We've seen it on the street. That's so far from what this is. And if you ask 90% of, Black and Latino council members who are honest, they will tell you that the parents in their district want these people in our schools, because even beyond just safety, like you said, there are psychological factors of somebody that people can talk to that's sort of like an objective listener, and somebody who understands what they're going through, because they are or were parents. And it just this is why there's a disconnect between this 5-10% of people who keep telling everybody what they think they want, and people who keep saying you're not listening to us. And that's why we continuously have this problem, and people feel underrepresented. And I think that comments like that have a level of irresponsibility, and, like I said, a disconnect, which should be troubling to anybody who wants to have an honest debate.
Well, I can tell you a paramilitary organization that actually worked in the schools. Have you ever heard of the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts? Well, they actually are a paramilitary organization that was taken out of the schools here because I was a Cub Scout back in the day. But other than that, back to Chaz Green, he doesn't need a bulletproof vest, and he just proved it. And the thing is, that budget for bulletproof vests, not to contradict you, Mona, can go towards the pipeline to educators, from school safety to educators and social workers and so forth. But Chaz has something that's very dangerous here, which is access. He has access to the leadership, and that's what our kids don't have. And he has access to the parents' need, to leadership in the schools to do this programming and things of that nature. Because there's other schools, unsung heroes in the Bronx, that do the same thing with their own time and no money and no grant money, especially. And I get on them about that, getting the grant money. But that's another story. So that word access to leadership roles in the schools, that the people in the back office that we all know and love, Mona, that these people need to do these programs and stuff like Chaz Green, Special Shadow. I'm going to tag them.
And also, you're right that most parents who are against this are from more affluent communities, and chickens always come home to roost, right? Like we all have to breathe the same air, and we all have to walk in the same streets eventually, right? Like, it's like I say with speech, you want to shut someone else's down, eventually it's going to happen to you. So I think that the voices of parents need to be heard, and we need to really put the resources necessary into this situation.
No, I agree with all of you. I agree with you, Michael, with Damaris, with Dion. I agree with you, except for one thing. All right. Let me tell you something. This bulletproof vest thing, okay? Because they are the ones that are disarming these children. They are the ones that are dealing with loaded firearms. And if New York City has money for Thrive and has money to spend and throw down black holes and useless initiatives, they sure as hell have money to provide our school safety agents with bulletproof vests. The money is there, and they need to use it for the right things. There is enough money in New York City to do that and to do all of these other programs in our schools, to do that pipeline, as well as to bring more programs to our youth. Go ahead.
I do want to add to that, and for even our law enforcement agency, from what I understand, NYPD officers are required to pay for their own bulletproof vests as well. And so I'm sure now there is going to come that issue, because if we're talking about, our public safety agents, our police department is going to want to have something similar, since they're more likely to also be in the line of fire. So as a public, that is something that we really need to be discussing and demanding of our government, that if they're out there, why aren't we paying for these safety vests, right? These bulletproof vests for all our law enforcement agency, and not just one group is better than another or is worthy more so, right? And so I think that's certainly something as the public have to discuss. But I think that entire operation of providing bulletproof vests to our law enforcement came down to city funding. But like you said, if we had that amount of money for Thrive New York, or purchasing paramilitary equipment for their law enforcement instead of providing bulletproof vests for the guys, I think that is absolutely a conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you guys. So, thank you for having this conversation, for us talking about it. I just want to end with one last comment. Parents, be parents, okay? Parents need to take responsibility for raising your children. Don't try to be your children's friend. Be their parents. Because all of these children, everything that's going on here, these children have parents, they have family members. It takes a village. It takes the community. So we should all get involved. We should all get engaged. But parents, listen, it's on you. These are your children. Raise them right. So let's switch gears and let's talk about this gubernatorial race. So my favorite public advocate has officially filed his paperwork to run for governor. Jumaane Williams, for those who are unaware, is officially now running for governor as of yesterday. There are rumors that Tish James, who is our first Black woman Attorney General. She used to be the public advocate. Before that, she was a city council member. Is exploring, seriously exploring. There are news reports. AP came out with a report citing sources close to Tish that she is going to be running. We have our lovely Mayor de Blasio, who did run for president of the United States of America, who is also exploring running for governor. So, right now I count 1, 2, 3 Brooklynites possibly running for governor, with Hochul from upstate New York, who tapped Brian Benjamin, who I still don't understand what he brings to the table, considering how poorly he's done in his previous election for comptroller, and with no name recognition. But here I'll just throw it out to the floor. 3 possible Brooklynites running for governor. 1, do you guys think Kathy Hochul and her team are giggling and hee-heeing away? 2, do you think that Tish or de Blasio may run? I'll start with you, Michael.
Well, yeah, I do think that, Tish will run. But I do think that there's a problem here, right? I mean, like you said, there are 2 Black candidates from Brooklyn. They're going to be looking to the city for their base. And you're basically leaving Kathy Hochul around, who, by the way, will have a network in some of the 5 boroughs to run around the island in Westchester and upstate and Buffalo and Rochester and sort of like, run the numbers up there and say, hey, if I can get, a third of the vote in the city, I'm good. And, something has to give here for these candidates. And now if you throw de Blasio into the mix, you're talking about another Brooklynite, another guy who's going to go, for the lefty vote, and, Hochul gets a chance to run up the middle. The question here for Tish is this, to me. The question is, does she get into that trap where she has to run in sort of that, like, for the woke folk, or does she say, wait a minute, I can be the moderate too. Yes, I'm a Black woman, but you know what? I'm going to speak to the people in my community who agree with these moderate issues and moderate approaches and moderate politics. And you know what else? I'm going to go out to the suburbs and reach out to white voters, just like Eric Adams did throughout the 5 boroughs, and say, here's what I'm going to say. I'm presenting myself to you. Do you like it? And if you do, vote for me. And I think that she has the opportunity to do that. And if all of these candidates are in the mix and she can sort of avoid the trick and the sort of trap of having to go to the left because of the people who give you money and the interest and everything else that you're hearing, and messages correctly, and competes with Kathy on one front and competes with Jumaane and perhaps de Blasio on another, then she has a very good shot of winning.
Damaris, what are your thoughts? You think we may just have the another ceiling being broken with the first Black woman governor? I think you're muted. You're still muted. Okay.
I said
there we go.
I was debating whether or not I was supposed to plead the 5th here. But to be honest with you, I think the investigations, the lack of an end of an investigation for Trump and the beginning of a witch hunt investigation into Cuomo that then leads off to jumpstarting political careers, I think it's problematic, and I think it's going to be hard for her to win upstate New York. I mean, she may do well amongst the cities in upstate New York, but not necessarily within the smaller communities. I think a lot of people are now questioning her, I don't want to say legitimacy, but questioning her motives. I think Kathy Hochul, in a particular case, because she has become New York State's first female governor, who happens to be from upstate New York, I think she has an opportunity to make inroads within New York City, which she's been able to do as lieutenant governor for the past several years. And so if she can continue maintaining her base and her centrist, and she can relate to people, north of the southern tier, right? I think she's certainly going to have a better chance at it, and to be given that opportunity to remain being a centrist, where I think a lot of upstate New Yorkers, again, north of the southern tier, may see James as another New York City, such as Andrew Cuomo, such as Elliot Spitzer, right? And having, that continuation. And so I think there's definitely going to be a run for the money at this point for Kathy Hochul, because I think at this point it's hers to win and even hers to lose.
Let me just I'm going to give you the devil's advocate for that, which is, just as Kathy, has made inroads into the city, with Tish, you have somebody who, has a network of white women who are the sort of the economic driver behind much of the Democratic Party. You're talking about East Hampton, Sag Harbor, the North Shore of the island, go up and, up the Hudson, that, are going to be with her if she works it right? Like she's been working this community longer than Kathy Hochul has, and in a way which is sort of regionally more close to them. So just as Kathy can sort of cut into maybe Tish's base, I think Tish has a great opportunity here. If she, like I said, if she runs in a way, and let's talk about people in the suburbs, and I'm the attorney general, I'm the top law enforcement official in the state, and I'm going to make sure there's safety in this state, and she brings that message, I think she has a great opportunity. Just like Kathy is going to try to come in, she's got to try to push out.
Michael, I'm not going to disagree with you in that sense, but I still look at the
I'm not disagreeing with you either.
But when I look at the numbers, I think about that there are 19 million people in New York State. 8 million of them happen to live around this state. You know what I mean? We have more independents that are now registered than there are between, as it's growing between the parties. I mean, obviously different for New York, New York City. And while I agree that Tish obviously has those connections and everything else, but I think one of the key things that you happen to mention were they were white women. I think Kathy Hochul being the first female also are going to have those same connections. And I think there may be a possibility of, I coined the term of white female guilt, who didn't support Hillary Clinton. Right. And so they're now kind of like, oh, we have an opportunity to represent women, but represent women who understood where I've come from, who understand what it's like to be outside of New York City, who understand what those needs are in upstate New York and in the island or anywhere, outside of New York City Metro. And so I think, again, there are those opportunities in which Kathy has inroads that I think Tish James is not necessarily going to have. I think also New York State may be tired of the fact that not in the last few administrations that we have elected from the attorney general into the governorship as if it's, they're passing on the baton, so New Yorkers may no longer wanting to see that. But at the same time, I see a political difference between outside of New York City Metro and New York City's progressive politics. And I think there's going to be very much a run for the money again.
Right. But remember, the numbers change in a Democratic primary, right? Like, yes, there are 19 million people and there are 8 million people in the city, but, you have who's voting in the primary and where do those people live? So then the math sort of changes. And I think that in an election, everything is cumulative, right? So it's when you talk about sort of the city, well, you talk, there's Freeport, there's Belmore, there's Hempstead, there's Mount Vernon. It's not just the 5 boroughs of New York City or certain boroughs in New York City. But this is why Jemani becomes a problem for her, I think, in a lot of ways. And my point is, I actually agree with everything you're saying. What I'm trying to say is, for Tish to win, she's going to have to go outside her comfort zone in a way where I think the message will matter. And if she gets caught up in an out-lefting contest with Jemani, like, it's not going to work for her. They're going to have to sort of resist that temptation. I think she does have a path in a primary to victory, and she's never lost an election yet. So, I wouldn't underestimate her.
Oh, right.
Dion, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, Mona, let's start with Kathy Hochul. Kathy Hochul, I think, should probably be like Hillary Clinton and feel a sense of betrayal after bringing on Brian Benjamin to, put the black people, at ease. But she was even endorsed by Dr. Hazelyn Dukes of the NAACP, which we are members, and I thought was completely inappropriate. But they're a 501c4. But Jemani in there, de Blasio in there, gives Kathy Hochul a better chance at winning. But I'm actually going to probably hopefully bring on Lee Zeldin as a client, who's the Republican candidate. I'm going to say the same thing to him as I say to you now. The more those Democrats with deep pockets in the primary, let them spend that money and go at it. That way, we can have another Governor Pataki situation in which they'll be so crippled by November, Lee Zeldin can pull up an upset and get 29% of the vote here in the city because, Mona, let's be honest here, it's only going to get worse in these streets, as it were. And that's a better look for them. And I think that's what's going to happen. And I got a nice, interesting factoid that hopefully should make Michael laugh. As you know, I'm here in Morris Park with Sam Ravel's campaign for Bronx Borough President. Now, one of the residents said something very interesting about Kathy Hochul and why she might lose. She said, Dion, this is a white woman, mind you. She said, Dion, you know what? White women don't vote for white women. And that's probably what's going to happen to her. I'll end there.
Let me tell you how many districts there are around this state where black women or even the country represent white districts. It's a crossover thing you don't often see. Usually, whatever the thing is what sort of elects you. So I think that's like an extremely good point. And just to go back to Lee Zeldin, whose district I spend a lot of time in, not to be underestimated at all. Very good transactional politician. The attempts to tie him to Trump, I think, are not going to go well because I think he works the state very well. And once we get out of this primary, I have a very good feeling that we're going to have a very competitive election. This isn't going to be the Democrat wins it and sits at home. This is going to be on,
Especially if he brings me on. I got a lot of tricks for him to do.
I'll let him know.
Fair enough, but I'm still going to say I think it's time for the women. So maybe you can start supporting us for these roles, right? But also going back into it, if you're
I've been talking up a woman the whole time.
To Kathy Hochul, to Letitia James, to Monty Williams, I think the one who's going to be more center to represent Mance and still end up being Kathy Hochul, and because she actually has the experience and understands the executive branch. But it's not to say that the others are not going to be qualified from I guess for certain standpoints. They've all been in office for a very long time, but we'll see.
There's a lot of uncertainty with all these people from Brooklyn running and being from the city, and she's from the state. So it's going to be very interesting to see all that chopped up because you always need the city to win. So as there's a city's going to be chopped up in chaos, Miss Hochul has a chance. But then again, upstate, if they pull a card that she was a big gun rights advocate and all that kind of rural country stuff, then it might be a loss. But then again, there's a lot of Cuomo dirt left on her, if you know what I mean. What's going on? And there's a lot of staffers I know up in that area with Cuomo, and that's with her, and back and forth. That there's a lot of chaos behind the scenes that should be coming out shortly, just like Eric Adams.
So, it's going to be interesting to see how all of this is going to unfold. I'm sure, as Dion said, a whole lot of stuff is going to be coming out, but. Just one comment. Speaking of the governor, before we went live, I saw a tweet or something that he's been charged. So, I guess he's going to be doing a perp work soon. But we'll talk about that next week. So, speaking of Eric Adams and, of course, Curtis Slewa, earlier we showed a clip regarding school safety, but, from a debate that was done between the two candidates. And right now we're in the midst of early voting. The numbers for early voting are really low. I've taken a look at the numbers. Just looking at the Bronx, Manhattan, Queens, Staten Island, Brooklyn. These early voting numbers, to me, are concerning. But I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on what's going on with early voting, and what do you think? Is Eric gonna win? Because most likely he will win. He's almost certain, because when you look at the numbers in New York City, Democrat registration versus Republican registrations. But when we look at the fact that Eric won the June primary, the Democratic primary, with less than 0.5%, not less than 1%, less than 0.5% against Catherine Garcia, neck and neck. He won by less than 0.5%. That means that Eric does not have a mandate. Okay? He does not have a mandate. And I'm going to keep it real. Before this election, I never really heard of Catherine Garcia. I knew who she was. I knew that she was a capable manager, but she was just, another city employee, commissioner. Didn't really pay attention to her. But look at how well she did with ranked choice voting and in this election with such a crowded field, with Eric only winning the Democratic primary again by less than 0.5%. Looking at the general election, how do you guys think Curtis Slewa is going to fare in this general election? I want to start with you, Dion. What are your thoughts on the general election?
Well, as you know, I'm supporting Bill Pepitone. Him and Stacey Pressman, who I also know from the Libertarian Party, those people are, the 3 and 4, if you want to call it that. But Curtis Slewa, unfortunately, being with the Guardian Angels and consistently wearing the Guardian Angel attire, is not being taken seriously on the right side of things in the realms of Republicans, conservatives, and the rest of the gang. You could fear getting there's 8 other names on that ballot, so people might actually exercise their vote if they're not programmed with the blue Kool-Aid to put the bubble somewhere else, And that's what I want to say about that. But the thing about it is, with Eric Adams, if things keep getting worse and the voter turnout keeps getting abysmal, maybe he too will feel this thing of what's going on, and his voter turnout will be so low and so close, it might send him a message, or send the world a message. It might send the world a message if Curtis Slewa actually wins, to show people are so disgusted with what's going on here. But we shall see.
Yeah, I agree that with Dion, that sort of like, I think Curtis sort of missed an opportunity to just sort of not wear the outfit and just really sort of with a more serious candidacy.
Or the cats. Forget the cats too.
Right. It would have been a different situation. Then again, I mean, Republicans tend to vote day of, Democrats tend to be the early voters. And you took the words out of my mouth, which is, if this thing's close, and I don't think, and I've been wrong a million times, that Curtis will take it. But if it's anywhere near close, that's certainly going to be a message. And then you're going to start to see people running quite differently for other offices.
Damaris?
So I do know that, there are multiple, as Dan had happened to mention, there are multiple candidates that are running besides Eric and Curtis, right? So you have those at the Independent Party, the Libertarian Party, Green Party, Working Families Party, the Socialist Party. So there are choices. And I think if we continue seeing crime rise in this way, I think who knows, we may end up getting a third party candidate. It may end up being a scenario as to how de Blasio had won, all those years ago amongst those top contenders that kind of ended up, shooting themselves out of, their own positions. And so I think, whether there's an opportunity for Rajas or for Quandra Francis or for, I'm sorry, I'm not remembering. She's the only Latina still in the race. She happens to be running. She's a socialist that's running. So I think there may be potentials and possibilities especially if Democrats do not turn out. They may be so fed up with the entire situation, whether it's federal down to local, as to what's been going on and what's been going on in the last 2 years. I'm absolutely concerned about, from a national standpoint, how Democrats are going to do come midterm elections. And so I think this election coming up, and especially come Tuesday, I think that's going to say a lot about what the next 2 years are going to be like, or when the next midterm elections are happening, right? Depending on how those numbers go, because there are a lot of Democrats that are just fed up, with the entire scenario. And you have a lot of progressives that are fed up with the entire scenario. They may not feel that they're being heard. Conservatives who don't feel that they're being heard. And I think it's going to be a tight race. I mean, granted, we could all say that Eric is definitely the winner because of how many registered Democrats there are, and they just go and they vote D all the way. And, many may not do the research, but with the low voter turnout, and depending on how the rest of these candidates come out, and depending on how frustrated people are with the Democratic Party, I think this year is going to be close.
Right. I mean, I think there's a disconnect between most people who consider themselves Democrats and sort of like the Twitter sphere, wokester, sort of MSNBC population, and they're not talking about the same set of issues, right? I mean, there was a report that came out recently. Forgive me, I just forget who put it out, but it was it did a study on the effect of automation on sort of like the job market, and not just the jobs that are so available right now, with restaurants and stuff like that, but sort of like jobs that people would traditionally have. And it's having a huge impact, more than I thought it was overblown, but it seems like it really is. And like the Democratic Party doesn't talk about these things. Like they don't talk about any of these things, right? They talk about identity politics and all these other issues, and it's like the issues that would help all working people are the issues that are going to help people in Black and Latino communities in New York City, right? Which is like getting a good job, having healthcare. No matter what we can disagree on the path to that, but you got to talk about these things, right? Like, and like the party's not really like just talking about them, and I think people are starting to feel left out. And the next few years are going to be interesting to see where, Black and Latino voters go, where we're in sort of the disconnect between elite and working people, and the coalitions that kind of get built around the other side, right, with the left and the right, because they're sort of starting to see they share some interests here. It's going to be an interesting thing to see.
That's right. And Eric Adams still hasn't made a public statement about the COVID mandates. As you know, I'm with Blexit now on their board, and we had an event about anti-vax mandates with workers' rights. And tomorrow, with former Councilman Andy King, we're going to be at the Concourse Supreme Courthouse protesting, the only ones protesting against these mandates. And Eric Adams still hasn't made a statement. And the movement against the mandates is so festering that Black Lives Matter has even tagged up with Back the Blue. Did you know that? That's how bad it's gotten right now with all these ideologies over the mandates. It's unifying a lot of forces here. And if that energy flows over into the booth, it might actually be very interesting.
It's interesting that you're talking about the situation with the mandates, because that's actually our final topic for this evening. Personally, for me, my opinion is to each his own. I was not supportive of forcing our hospital workers to take this vaccine. I was not supportive of firing them and replacing them with other workers from other countries because of this vaccine. They worked throughout last year when we didn't have a vaccine, when we didn't fully understand this virus. They put their lives on the line for all of us. And, I think that it's really ungrateful and disrespectful how we're treating them. But again, it's the decision has to be made by each individual on what's in the best interest of them, and I hope in consultation with their physician. I read the statement from the joint statement with the PBA, FDNY, Detective Endowments Association, the lieutenants, and the sergeants. And this vaccine mandate, one of the things that they've pointed out, especially the FDNY has pointed out, how this will impact our marginalized communities, with so many FDNY personnel. And FDNY includes not just the firemen, but also EMS, who are going to be banned from work because of their refusal to take this vaccine, that doesn't prevent us from catching COVID later, but that's a whole other story. But, forcing, coercing this arbitrary date, and the pushback. I've seen the pushback on television, pushback in Europe and in the European countries. And I was wondering when the pushback was going to come here to the US, come to these wonderful shores. And we're starting to see the pushback with these municipal workers. And I think that it will have an impact on this election. And this is just not the only issue that Eric is quiet about. He's also quiet about the school safety issue. So,
of course,
we're starting to see a pattern here, an alarming, concerning pattern. But I'm worried as a parent, how this, with the police, with so many people who are refusing to take this vaccine, FDNY, how is this going to impact our families and our communities? And if there's an emergency, what is going to happen then? Do you guys think, perhaps, considering, as they said in their statement, they worked all last year without a vaccine, and they already put their lives at risk? Do you think, and I'll start with Damaris, do you think that Mayor de Blasio should have given them more time, or just let them be? Or, like, what are your thoughts on this, Damaris?
So I mean, I had my vaccine, right? I'm vaxxed, and I was hesitant, but for my own reasons. I think the whole argument happens to be really interesting because our workers were concerned about, working last year without having a vaccine and what their protections were going to be, and not having the right preparations or the right tools to be able to help them prevent from getting COVID. Well, now there's a vaccine and, the mandate to wear masks. Well, now they're upset about that. So it's kind of like, well, last year you had no problem going to work, even though knowing that you could potentially get this, this disease and potentially, die or carry it home to your family members and all that. And there was all those fears, and people were upset that the government wasn't prepared to really protect them, and how come we didn't have a vaccine at this point, and to really protect. Well, now the vaccine is here. Now we're talking about mask mandates and all that stuff. And now suddenly there's a pushback of, how dare you force upon me these rules, these laws? And it's kind of like, but the government has always forced upon rules and these laws that have made somebody, not everybody, but somebody uncomfortable. So we're talking about, seatbelts, not smoking in, bars and restaurants, not being able, not having a cigarette while you got a 13-year-old in your car, right? So there's all these laws and mandates that society is not pushed back about, their civil right freedoms. But now that we have an opportunity to provide potentially a vaccine, suddenly we go back into my individual feelings, my individual rights, my all this. But Nobody had a problem forcing the laws upon people who didn't want to wear a seatbelt because it made them feel constricted or uncomfortable, right? Nobody had a problem with, banning cigarette smoking, but meanwhile you have all these addicts that are addicted to cigarettes, and you know what I mean? And so there was no concessions made because it was considered best for society. And so I just think the argument has switched because it goes back into individual. It's about me, my desire. But then when you break down the numbers, which I think is interesting, when we bring up FDNY and NYPD, well, they're primarily Republicans, right? And then you have the African American community who are paranoid due to previous governmental experimentations, right? So now you have these people where they're coming together, but they're coming together for different reasons and for their own reasons. But one group, they're law enforcement agents who does not want the law enforced upon them. I think that's a little odd and interesting. You know what I mean? You have, FDNY that are there to protect us and save us from the houses burning down so that it doesn't pass on to the next house, so that it doesn't pass on to the next house, so that it doesn't pass on to the next house. But they don't want to get a vaccine. It's the same similar situation, except it's your body passing the fire down from another person. It may not have necessarily severely impacted your household, but it may impact somebody else's household. And so I'm just wondering, again, are we going back into this individualistic needs? And this is my feelings, my needs, and I'm not going to do this as a group team effort. But last year they wanted us to all be a group team effort, and now this year we're like all about individual needs. And so I think I understand why some people would be concerned. I was absolutely concerned. I'm a cancer survivor, right? I have already concerns about medications and other things, so of course I was concerned about it. But I wasn't the first one to line up to go get it because I did have my concerns about science. Work out the bugs. I mean, there's those issues when you have first generation medicines, first generation cars, first generation technology. It all has issues that you need to kind of work out. But I also did not want to be the first one in line for those that were far more paranoid than I was, for those that were far more, may have other elements, that they certainly comorbidities that we're far more concerned with. But I eventually did it because, again, I wanted to travel. There were things that I wanted to freely go about to be able to do without being harassed or stopped from being prevented from traveling or prevented from going into a restaurant or to a concert venue and everything else. And so since the government has since been mandating me since I was a child about what vaccines I had to take, my parents didn't fight back about polio. They didn't fight back for all these, rubella and everything else. And the same thing with my children, that now I think as adults who are like, oh, no, no, no. And, no for my children. I'm like, well, did you stop your infant from getting a rubella and mumps and all those other, when they were an infant in the hospital, did you stop them now? But now you have a problem with it because it's you as a parent who feels that you're giving up your personal choice. But you had no problem, obfuscating, maybe the wrong word, but passing that, responsibility on to your child, like, oh, okay, that's fine. But so now I do have concerns. I think it's odd for those who were our first responders, who were upset that the government was not providing them with the resources that they needed to protect themselves. And now we do, and now there's a problem with taking it. And I think that's more of an individual interest than it really is about their fear about getting the vaccine, because we all eat and drink stuff that we should be concerned about, but no one questions what's the ingredients inside it. Whether you're drinking Coca-Cola or you're having a Diet Pepsi or fat-free foods, you know what I mean? Like, you're not necessarily questioning that. So now suddenly, I don't know. So that's my take, that I'm finding the pushback to be very odd. Was when last year everybody was dying for the government to provide them some type of protection, and now it's like, how dare you go against my civil liberties?
Well, I just want to be clear that I am not vaxxed, and I think I'm the only elected official technically that's against the mandates, even though I'm a pro bono county committeeman. But let's goes back to guilt and shame is what they're using now. And it goes back to two very dangerous concepts, which are common sense and critical thinking. Last year, the people to catch the virus mostly were at home. So why do we have all these restrictions? And the next thing is, did you know the Republicans actually got it right? Florida is the.
We can't hear you.
I'm so sorry, guys. I said, where did I leave off?
You were starting to talk about Florida.
Oh, yes. The Republicans actually got it right. Florida actually, the Governor DeSantis has the lowest COVID levels, but we're not even giving those people credit down there, which is unfortunate. A lot of people, when the rights to choose people, when I found them, they were so grateful to me in Brexit to actually stand up for this, because they said, it's going to actually affect the Black community the hardest, because they're not going to want to take the vaccine, and we're going to have the most life problems. And it was very disconcerting to see medical workers, either EMTs and in the hospitals, refuse the vaccine. So that also gave a lot of concerns to everybody else. And also, my doctor informed me of something that's very interesting. Tuberculosis, actually, if you are positive for tuberculosis, you can be arrested and put in a proper tuberculosis facility because you're refusing that. So when it comes to pandemics or plagues, as it were, biblically speaking, these rules are possible, but still, these elected officials, these candidates rather, aren't speaking about it like the major front runner, like Eric Adams, which is very concerning because a lot of people are continuing to lose their jobs.
So wait, I just also want to state, I mean, if you're an asthmatic and you're having an asthma attack and you go into the hospital and you decide to take your kid out, the parent will be arrested. They're going to show up because you're denying this child medical attention, right? So that's what I'm saying. There are a lot of mandates that we do have to follow and abide by depending on your health or what it is that you happen to do. That is there that we already have. I mean, you can't really check your child into school without having all these vaccines right now. Dion, you're until you become that parent to experience and dragging your
kids. That's very true, Damaris. But did you know that Brexit meeting that I hosted, parents are taking their children out of the schools and not letting them go to schools. So the Department of Education is very concerned. And now, thanks to us, we're actually promoting homeschooling. And we're giving those materials and support systems. A lot of parents are throwing their kids into the Catholic and private and parochial schools as well. So this is not going to end.
You still need to prove when you go to a Catholic school, you still have to show vaccination records. My kids went to both.
I don't disagree with that.
I still have to be able to show them that. And so, and having previously worked for the government, having previously worked for the New York State Senate, when you're going in for a religious exemption, you've had to prove that you've been using religious exemptions since the birth of your child. You can't suddenly turn around 12 years later and say, well, now suddenly it goes against my religious beliefs, because now the government is you're going to have to now prove that, you found a new religion, or you're a born again Christian, or you're now a devout, you're now orthodox about your religious views. But the government is still going to go back to follow up that, well, how come you didn't feel that way when your child was first born? Why did you feel that way when your child was first enrolled in, kindergarten and first grade and second grade and third grade?
That's very true, Damaris. But at our event, religious exemptions were talked about, along with medical exemptions and legal rights. Well, a lot of people fail to mention that atheists are now claiming religious exemptions. Like I said, this is making very strange bedfellows of everything. So those options are being exercised, and a lot of people are fighting it through those angles.
But remember, for an atheist, that's their religion. It's not that they observe a god or goddesses or what have you, right? So
I'm just saying
that's going against their personal beliefs. So again, I think it's really interesting as to how this is playing out. I mean, again, we saw there was a march on Brooklyn Bridge. Well, when you looked at it,
20,000 people.
Okay, well, who did you really see? Let's be honest. What did we really see? Was it a bunch of minorities, a bunch of women? I didn't really see a lot of minorities. I didn't see a lot of women there, right? What I did see was a lot of, New York City police officers who we already
already has
an issue with them for breaking the law.
They were there. I can attest they were there because I know a few of them. It's just that the media is spinning it to make the right to choose people look crazy. and the right wing and all white, and they play off our emotions. Just like Mona knows, Blexa had a meeting on Sunday about emotional learning.
So what is
That's
so
what it
we
is.
walk in waves? Wait. So honestly, so I get it because I only saw a few photographs, and I'll give you understanding again. As a communications director, I understand that the media has their own angle, but the reality is again, when you have a large group of people that is your and they're not mixed. What did we walk in waves? Did we that it was only people of color in one section, women in another section?
Right, the few people said it themselves to me. They said, Mr. Powell, we have no clue how to engage and incorporate the Maori community. That's why I'm with Blexa, to get more people open their brains and stop drinking the blue Kool-Aid, and they would do that because that's the civil rights problem, minority outreach.
It's called blue enough. But it's like, Russia does everything too. But like, the point here is these protests have been happening all over the city, all over the world. The media is hardly hold on. Let me just. The media is hardly reporting on it, and then they may have chosen to report one. They're happening everywhere, and the people who are against this movement are the same people you talked about. White people and black people. I do think a lot of them have the same reason for not wanting to take this, because I think the efficacy is in question. 4 out of the 5, counties in the country where COVID is on the rise the most, are the most vaccinated counties. We're starting to see that nobody's talking about, as the police said in their press release, no one's talking about rapid orphan testing, which was supposed to be part of the rollout. There was mitigation, there was vaccinations, and there was testing, right? They were preventative. They're not doing that, right? Every time somebody gets questioned about the power of immunity, I mean, Fauci was questioned on CNN. He said, I haven't thought about that. Like, really? You've been doing this for 2 years and you didn't think about what immunity meant which is 14 to 15 times more effective than getting this vaccine? And we have to stop acting like people are crazy because they don't want to take something. It's a medical procedure, which was tested for a very, very short period of time, as if there's no questions. People are getting sick from this vaccine. I got vaxxed too, by the way, just to let you know. But I don't want to act like people are crazy because they made a decision not to.
That's right. That's when it comes into the
not to. I mean, you talk about all these other. Here's another thing. On this lockdown. On this lockdown, one of the things that happened is that kids are being prevented from getting their own vaccinations from these things, which are much more likely to kill them. People aren't talking about that. There are a lot of people in the hospital now because people are drinking too much. They're obese. They don't get enough sunlight because they were on lockdown, and they're getting overloaded with that. So the media is telling you one story, and what's actually happening isn't necessarily the same story. And I'm just saying, we can't act like, and you talked about seatbelts. Well, unless you're being intellectually dishonest, like, I don't think anyone thinks it's worse not to have a seatbelt on to not have a seatbelt on, right? I think we could agree on that. When you talk about smoking, no one's forcing you to smoke. They're telling you you're not supposed to smoke. This is forcing you to take a drug, which probably could be the equivalent of 50 years of smoking.
No, because we're talking about civil liberties, right? But we're talking about personal choices that we're all
personal choices not to get the vaccine, just like not to smoke, right? It's not. They're not. It's not like they're making you smoke, right?
Well, no, it's not about. Well, it's not about making you.
But they're different things. You're analogizing things that are like apples and oranges. That's all I'm saying.
Well, Michael and Damaris, you forget, people are talking about this, like Blexit, once again, to plug them, just that the censorship or, media involvement with the narrative and controlling it in the public eye is the problem. And that causes more paranoia towards it when you try to stifle free speech in that fashion. Even though I say all the time, social media, once you check off that agreement box, that censorship doesn't, carry water. But still, the argument is being controlled. And it's that you have to have spaces with like-mindeds, like Blexit again, you can air these things out. And that's it.
When there were Black Lives Matter protests around the world, the media reported on this, right? I mean, but if you have a protest where you have Black, Latino, and white people together, like talking about something that the media doesn't necessarily agree with, suddenly you don't see it. And it's like, well, I'm not saying we all have to agree with this. I'm making an objective statement here, which is, why is this so underreported? It's a worldwide movement. There are people in Italy, dock workers won't unload the boats right now because they've just basically had enough. And we're not getting a fair accounting of how people feel. And we're not getting a fair accounting of the science and the question around the science. And like you're saying, well, let's just take one for the team and get the vaccine. That's not even proven to be that effective. I mean, as Mona said earlier, it's like, you can still get it and you can still give it to people and it wears off. It's like, well, how many of these shots do you want
like
to get?
what Dion had to happen said. Dion happened to mention that more people had gotten infected while they were in their apartments, right? But we also know that there was a difference in we didn't know what was going on. We do know that people then, as mentioned, since they were vitamin D deficient, since they were not going outside, since they were not appropriately exercising, since we were not, generating, I mean, fewer people got the flu, fewer people got sick as well because of our mask mandates, right? So we do know that it happened to have worked. But we also know that there was that element. And so my household, we were able to go outside. There's why a lot of people moved out of apartments into houses so that they can be outside, so that they can get, sun and be out and get fresh air. And then we know that they closed a lot of streets throughout New York City so that people could go outside, so that they could get air, so that they could get sunlight, so that they could have that
was a great decision.
That you weren't depressed and you weren't, you know what I mean? So that they were not emotionally being impacted by the lack of connections with other human beings. But again, I still think that the whole situation happens to be very interesting, but I think it is an individualistic choice. But I still think that it's interesting that we now have all these people who are protesting, who had no problem protesting that their children needed to be vaccinated for the measles or
those are tried and tested vaccines that have been around for 100 years. It's not something that was tested in 2 months.
Well, COVID-19, no, because we've known about the coronavirus for years. So it's there. This is just a new version of the gene that keeps,
Well, let's talk about.
If you take chicken pox or the mumps or measles and you go to a graveyard that's 100, 150 years old, you'll see 6-year-olds filling that place up, right? COVID was a less than 1% thing. It hardly affected children. It's just apples and oranges. Like, it's not the same thing.
Well, let's talk about the money, okay? Because when you go to a doctor's appointment like myself and say, hey, you know what? I want to get COVID tested here. And they tell you no. I'm like, why not? Well, your insurance won't pay for it. You have to go to one of those freebies outside. And then it's like you mentioned coercion earlier, Michael, in the sense that Black people are very mistrusting. But when you're in Louisiana, you say, hey, we'll expunge your criminal record if you take this vaccine. I don't know. And that's the kind of mixed messaging we're saying. And that's very true. I had the flyer that was sent to me. Once again, through the Blex organization was going down there south. They're using all these goodies and freebies, as we say here in New York, to actually get Black people to actually do it. And a lot of Black people was like, no, you can't really bribe us with these kind of things. We're still going to say no. And that's going to be happening all over the place. But like I said before, the censorship or using your social media platforms and actually using buzzwords as COVID and getting these flags on all your stuff, it's just squeezing it, and more of it's coming out of your fingers,
What's the commonality between people of any color in this equation? It's the elite versus the working people, right? Whether it's the Trumpsters or people in New York, whatever. And the elite are so often wrong. We were in Afghanistan for 20 years, and all those same folks didn't seem to figure that out right. Like, why should people? And I think, and I'm going to go back to this point, the media is underreporting this because they don't like the fact that people are getting together around this issue, because then something might actually happen. And it's if you watch alternative media, they will show you protests all over this world, in this country, of people of every color in cities, in countries, in the suburbs, and they don't like this. And I'm not saying I even necessarily agree with them. I'm saying we have to stop acting on one side of this equation like these people are crazy. They have a point. It's, we don't know the effects of this. My mother was hospitalized after getting it with 3 different things, which they say are now connected to the vaccine. Let's take this seriously and really have a dialogue and not force people to do something they don't want to do.
I have 2 quick points for you, Mona. We would be remiss not to give a shout out to the audience that's making all the wonderful comments here that's on the bottom of my screen. I want to say a few of them and comment to them. I will say this. We have to pay attention to who is not getting the vaccine. And I'm going to shout out Inez Dinkins, because Inez Dinkins caught the COVID virus, and we all come to find out people like that have access are actually promoting the Kool-Aid but not drinking it. So it's like, wait a minute, I want to see the vax cards of all our elected officials and Zuckerbergs and the Bloombergs and all those folks, and that way I think I too will feel more comfortable.
Same people who are dining without masks at every turn.
Yeah,
right? And going to the hairdresser
Wow, this is quite a lively topic, but next week's show, I know that we can talk about, the fallout of this vaccine on our municipal workers, especially our NYPD and FDNY, and see whatever the latest developments are, and hopefully we'll also have more up-to-date news on the gubernatorial election. And next week when we meet, the general will be over, and I think we may have a new mayor, unless it's really close and it goes to a runoff. So, with that being said, I want to say, Damaris, Michael, Dion, thank you so very much for joining us this evening at On the Spot. For our viewers, thank you for joining us this evening, for staying with us. I know we went way over time, but these topics, we're very passionate about these topics, and sometimes we just don't pay attention to the time. But we hope to see you.
What's your opinion, Mona?
Yeah. We hope to see you next week, Thursday at 8:00 for On the Spot, where the number one topic, the first topic that we'll be discussing is the mayoral election, and let's dissect these numbers, or dissect the numbers that we're going to have.
$600, that tax thing where they want to look at you.
Oh, yes. Yes, which is that whole tax thing is outrageous. They need to stay out of our business. But yeah, absolutely. We will also be discussing that because, Michael, I'm pretty sure a lot of people are unaware of what the Biden administration is trying to do now. Really, really get into our business.
Yeah,
So
everyone, federal.
Yes. We ran out of time. So again, thank you so very much for joining us on the spot, and we'll see you next week, Thursday at 8:00. Thank you, everyone. Be safe and be well. Good night.
Phew, that was close. I was so nervous.